So the next thing I'm going to talk about is ethical investing, which the subject guide is really big on. And so I'd suggest you look into it. They recommend a journal article. I don't know if we're able to get hold of it, but if you can, do read it, because it looks like something that the examiners quite like, because you have a lot of scope to maybe develop your own ideas or think about your own opinions. So building on the things I discussed in the last video, we need to talk about ethical investing. The case given in the subject guide, I can't remember what it's called. Cowan and Scargill was a case. It wasn't a case about ethical investing. It was a case about, I think it was pensions for employees. But they were employees of a national coal board, so miners who produced coal. And because the company was running this pension scheme, they didn't want their employees' pensions to be investing in competitors of the coal agency. But the court says you can't do this. The fact that this was set up for employees of coal miners is irrelevant. Once you're a trustee, you need to be making disinterested decisions about how you're going to invest the money. The fact that it comes from a coal board it's not relevant, because a reasonably prudent investor isn't going to be deterred by the company or the stocks that they're investing in being a competitor to the coal board. So that's an important case. And what they raise is the difficulties around ethical investing. Ethical investing has become quite a big buzzword for a lot of economic thought recently. It's a slightly foreign concept because I think it's very Western. The idea of ethical investing, a lot of it is based around either investing in companies that treat their workers right or don't harm the planet, either by using too much fossil fuels or producing products that can't be thrown away or can't be recycled, so they just go to landfill and they continue to fill up landfills. Or companies that maybe come from countries that don't respect human rights or don't have policies that, they might discriminate against women, or they might discriminate against people on the basis of their sexuality. And ethical investing is just an umbrella term for picking and choosing the investments that you make. So maybe creating an investment portfolio based on companies that meet a certain ethical standard. Depending on what your ethical standard might be, it's often about human rights, or it's often about supporting companies that make good environmental decisions. And the suggestion from the Cowan case is that trustees can't make those decisions. They can't say, I'm not going to invest in a good, safe investment that's going to have a good yield because I don't agree with the ethics of whatever this company is doing. The suggestion is that the court would say, no, you can't do that, and a beneficiary could take that trustee to court and compel them to put aside their own ethical qualms and invest in a way that a normal investor would do. There are difficulties with this. For example, I think you should work through the exercises in the book, but one of the issues is money left to a church, and the church wants to invest in Christian literature. Well, it might not be a very good investment. It might not make the trust and the beneficiaries a lot of money, but maybe that's what the beneficiaries want. But more importantly, if the trust says that they can make those kind of investments, or the trust and the settlor, when he or she created the trust, specified what kind of investments they wanted the trustees to make, then the trustees are bound by that. Even if maybe they're bad investments, that's fine. What's more difficult is where there is nothing said in the trust, and so it falls to the Trustee Act 2000, which gives the power of investment. And so the trustees have to apply a standard of prudence that they will invest as another reasonable investor might do. Now, there is an argument, hopefully you got a sense in the last video, that there's lots of ways you can invest money, and trustees have a lot of options. And so just because they avoid certain types of investing doesn't mean that they're bad investors. And if they're still making good returns to the beneficiaries and doing what the trust is set up to do, they're unlikely to maybe come into criticism for, let's say, not investing in fossil fuel companies. But there's a lot of there's a big range of what people consider ethical companies, and where people draw the line of, well, you shouldn't be investing in those companies. If a trustee refused to invest the money in a company that was likely suspected of participating in human trafficking, for example, or using trafficked workers in their factories, but maybe it couldn't be proved, or the country that the company was set up in wasn't conducting proper investigations. If a case like that came to court, and a case like that hasn't come to court, ask yourself, is a judge really going to say, no, the beneficiaries want you to invest in a company suspected of human trafficking, I think the trustees should do it? It seems really unlikely. On the other hand, depending on how old school the judge is, if a trustee refused to invest in, let's say, a coal company because they're producing fossil fuels that are damaging the planet, a judge might say, yeah, but fossil fuels are a normal investment to make, and so it's more unreasonable for a trustee to be refusing to make that investment. On the other hand, the fact that we're burning fossil fuels has become massively urgent now, and we need to move over to electricity. I don't want to get on a soapbox about the ecological disaster impending the earth, but a judge might be much more sympathetic and say, yes, absolutely, trustees can make those sorts of calls of, they have a lot of options. If they don't want to invest in fossil fuel companies, there's still lots of good companies that they could invest in and still make the same amount of money for the beneficiaries. So just think about that. Think about where the ethical lines are, how you would argue it. It's the sort of thing that might come up in an essay question. So I would give it a bit of thought. If you want questions, or if you want to bounce ideas off of me, by all means, write in or send an email, or ask Millie to send a message. And we can discuss it a little more. I realise it's quite a nebulous concept. It can be a bit difficult to get your head around. But it looks like the subject guide quite likes it, so it's possible it would appear in the exam paper. And the final thing I just wanted to flag is this idea of even-handedness that the subject guide mentions. Even-handedness often means that you have to be fair between the beneficiaries. When we spoke last week about types of trusts, so contingent and defeasible interests, so you remember Jane, who had a life interest in a house, and then Mary had to sell the house and split the proceeds between her cousins. There might be where, let's say, a lot of money is left by a wealthy old man who dies, and he wants to leave his wife a life interest in the money, and for her to live a good lifestyle while she's still alive, but then wants it to pass to his children, sometimes for tax reasons, or it might be his second wife, so they're not her children, so she wouldn't leave them money in her will. The trustees might have a duty of even-handedness, so to bear in mind the different and competing interests. So the wife might have a right to the income while she's alive, but she doesn't have a right to the capital. So trustees might want to make a more slightly riskier investment so that she gets enough money to live on, but they have to be careful not to risk that capital that the children are eventually going to inherit. So that's what it's meant by even-handedness. So long as the trustees are making good, reasonable judgments, and something happens, there's a worldwide recession, the company unexpectedly goes under, if they're making those investments in good faith, they're very unlikely to be in breach of their duties unless they're really negligent. So just because something goes wrong, or the trustees lose the money, or the investment turns out to be a bad one, that doesn't mean the trustees have breached their duty, but it's an indication that they may have done. And so you might get a scenario where the question is, something's gone wrong, the trustees have made an investment, or one of the beneficiaries is unhappy about an investment, and you have to think, well, how reasonable was the trustee to have made that investment or handled the money in that way? And that's, again, it might come into a problem question. So you need to have a think about what a reasonable investment would look like.